Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So we are going to keep things muted for now, except for the panelists. You'll notice if you've been on a Zoom before, we're not going to do webinar style. We want to be able to see everyone. So we'll ask you all to be respectful by keeping yourself muted during the panel, and we will take questions in the chat throughout if you'd like. And we'll get started. You can also use the chat throughout to introduce yourself if you'd like to, where you're signing in from, as well as if you went to TechCon SoCal earlier this year. It'd be great to see if you were there or this is your first time joining us. So let me kick things off. Hi there, I'm Neil Bloom. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a tech investor, and I run a tech newsletter about the San Diego tech community called freshbrewedtech.com. So thanks for joining us. We have a very topical discussion happening tonight in light of how different the world looks since our January TechCon SoCal, specifically in the digital health space. You're going to hear from investors, enterprise company technology leads, and startups on how COVID has impacted their worlds and is impacting yours too as those technologies get adapted into the new normal. So like I mentioned, we're going to keep everyone's mic muted for now, except for the panelists. We're happy to take questions in the chat. And if you want FaceTime with any individual panelist, at the end, we're going to create breakout rooms where you can go in and have ask your panelist directly a question for FaceTime. So stick around if you'd like to after 6. The panelists have graciously offered to stay around an extra 30 minutes. So appreciate that. Thank you, panelists. And without further ado, why don't we have the panel introduce themselves? Fazal, you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Faisal Mushtaq. I'm the CTO of Sleep Number, where I lead the global product development, research, and innovation. My background is mostly startups. I've been part of multiple startups, taking a company from ideation to successful exits, both in Bay Area and Southern California. I also am an investor in early stage companies and a part of TCA, and really passionate about the tech ecosystem in Southern California. So TechCon SoCal, I'm the founder of TechCon SoCal, and the goal is to promote and become a catalyst for innovation and entrepreneurship in Southern California. And I'm also a president of TIE, which is the San Diego chapter, and which is a global entrepreneurship organization. So thank you again.
Thank you, Fazal. Thank you for creating this platform for us to engage as well in these great conversations. Daniel Haters, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, first, thanks, Neil, for moderating. Faisal, thank you for inviting me to be on the panel. Daniel Haters, I am the Managing Director of Digital Health at NextCubed and an operating partner for digital health at Sway Ventures. Sway is a traditional, diversified VC fund with just shy of $400 million AUM. And NextCubed is a company that invests in pre-A frontier technology companies via a venture studio model and also an accelerator. Between the two firms, oversee a portfolio of about 30 different digital health firms that range all the way from cybersecurity and healthcare to the virtualization of clinical care delivery to the pharmaceutical space and using software to discover drugs or design clinical trials. I'm a scientist by training, and I've worked my entire life in startups, first starting in the biopharma space, working for a company that in-licensed a drug, and we successfully took that from concept through a phase 1, all the way to more recently working in a connected health startup where we created connected drug delivery devices for the biologic space that we sold to a strategic med device company in the sector. So really excited to be here and share the panel with everyone that you see here.
Thank you, Daniel. Glad to have you. And Bobby Ghoshal, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Neil and Faisal for the invite. I'm sure it's everyone's here. It's the end of the day, so everyone must be tired. So let's keep this interaction very interesting and informative. So first about ResMed, maybe a minute to introduce my company. If you're not aware, we are a global leader in connected med devices, a leader in sleep apnea therapy. And very recently, we are in the news because of COVID. We also manufacture ventilators, so in the respiratory care space. And recently in SaaS as well. So through some acquisitions, we now also provide platforms for provider to deliver care at home or in facilities based, mostly out of hospital care. So with that, we are headquartered here in San Diego, and I'm the first CTO. This is my third role at ResMed. Actually, I led the biggest acquisition that ResMed has done so far, Brightree, which is based in Atlanta. It's a software SaaS company on which the home medical equipment providers operate and provide care for their patients. So very excited to be here.
Thanks, Bobby. We're really excited to dive in with the three of you now. And let's jump into it. Like I mentioned real quick, we're going to keep all the audience on mute for now, but we're happy to take your questions in the chat, as well as introduce yourself where you're dialing in from. We'd love to hear that. So jumping into it, obviously, COVID affected all of us, right? Personally, work-wise, we all changed the way we worked. But to the panel itself, how did it change the kind of business that you did? What did COVID really do almost immediately in terms of the business you were working on, and during the initial kind of shock factor? Bobby, you want to take that one first?
Here, I can go first. How long do you want the answer? Because we were in the middle of this and it could be a very long answer. So how long, how deep do you want me to go?
We'll go a few minutes and then we'll pull more out of you after we hear a little bit.
Sounds good. Actually, we are a global company with operations in 140 countries, including China. So guess what happened first? Is our team in China were very much in the center of the outbreak of this pandemic, which, as you know, started in Wuhan, Hebei province of China. Our people, ResMed people, actually were handing out ventilators to hospitals in that province. So we got a fairly early view into the pandemic. And as the pandemic spread across the world, we were all the way through it. So Mick, our CEO, with our government affairs team, were in constant touch with various governments throughout the world as we were trying to figure out how do we manufacture more ventilators, allocate more, the ventilators that we had. Everything was in short supply. Supply chain was in, and the dynamics of it changed. For example, one of our ventilators has 10,000 parts, out of which a few parts were from Italy. And guess what? When Italy, the COVID crisis spiked, the supply chain stopped. And so we had to figure out how do we make sure we ramp up our ventilators, which we did like 3x to meet the demands that came almost immediately. But at the same time, how do we ensure that we are able to meet that kind of a demand with a supply chain that's very unpredictable across the world? So we had a crisis team in place that was operating almost 24/7, interfacing with governments, interfacing with customers, understanding how do we allocate, at the same time ramp up our production. So that was all happening on our manufacturing side. On the digital side, what we aim to do is to connect all of our devices. So we accelerated our digital roadmap. For example, we figured out that the ventilators that we were putting out there, it would be hugely beneficial if we could connect them. So for remote patient monitoring of each of these devices, to make those available to the clinicians would be a big win for those providing on the field service. So we wrapped that part of our digital. We also looked at how care was being provided in other markets, and a lot of it was face-to-face interaction with patients, respiratory care therapists, setting up sleep patients, getting mask sizing, etc. So and obviously with COVID, that couldn't happen, right? So many of the sleep labs pretty much shut down. So we started to look at how do we help with digital solutions throughout this patient journey. And so we launched quite a few products to help during COVID. So it's all very quick, teams that put together from ideation to shipping a product in 6 weeks or less. So huge activities around digital as well. And internally, we had to pivot almost overnight to working from home. So that was also something that ResMed had to, we are a public company. Our finance team, for example, had to close their books, all working from home. And I'm glad to say without a hitch, it seemed very seamless. We had 7,500 people. Of course, some of them had to go to our manufacturing facilities or distribution centers, but besides those, everyone else working from home. So a very seamless transition to a different mode of working remotely.
Wow. We're gonna dive deeper into that because obviously it's changed your business forever in many ways. Daniel, likewise with you, you kind of have two parts of your business: managing the existing portfolio of life science, digital health companies, and looking for new companies to invest in. How did COVID affect those two kind of business areas for you?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Neil. So from an investment point of view, I'm excited to say that NextCube, literally this week, we launched a new cohort of digital health companies. So we made 5 new investments this year. So we are an active investor, but I would be lying to say that our process was not disrupted. And it was disrupted for a lot of reasons. You can imagine that on one side, the due diligence that we were doing on firms February 1st or pre-February 15th was very different than the due diligence that we needed to be doing on April 1st. And so our investment process was significantly extended while we went back and dotted all our I's twice and crossed all our T's again and again. But nonetheless, we have still moved forward and made an investment, but with a specific focus on companies that are not just surviving in COVID, but are literally part of the solution to solving COVID. And I'll point to, there was a CB Insights poll that was recently run of senior executives in the healthcare space. And they asked, what is it that you think is going to propel us out of this pandemic? And only 12% of the respondents actually pointed to therapeutics or vaccines. They pointed to the software that surrounds healthcare is actually going to be the thing that pulls us through. And the reason why people think about it that way is because vaccines, even once created after a long process, just the distribution and getting it to the right people and solving for all of the details of healthcare are what's really going to hold this up. So we were a part of that, but we are active. From the part of managing our portfolio, we've seen a number of our portfolio companies have actually accelerated their growth as part of what's happened with COVID. So for instance, we have a company, Repurpose AI, which has just recently signed drug development agreements with Scripps Research and with Leo Pharma. And that's because Repurpose uses software to discover drugs that are already known to be safe and repurpose them into new diseases, COVID-19 being one of them. So obviously that company has been on the forefront of the response to this pandemic. We've also seen businesses local to San Diego like Vessel, who had been and still is developing urinalysis technology, basically at-home clinical grade laboratory technology, but at home and digitized. They've semi-pivoted to develop at-home COVID testing using that same technology platform and are now working on an emergency use authorization. And so we've had a number of companies, these are just 2 of the examples, that have actually thrived as part of this. I'd be lying if I said it was every company, but in many ways, the companies that we've been investing in at NextCube and Sway over the last 3 years were the companies that we saw as being part of the future of healthcare, what will be the mainstay that healthcare was supposed to look like 10 years from now. But essentially 10 years of development has now been compacted into about 120 days, because everything that was supposed to be the future of healthcare is the healthcare that we now need today to overcome this pandemic. So there's a saying that's sort of going around in the industry is that it's a good time to have been a digital health investor 3 years ago, because the companies that have good management teams have been able to develop. They were on the precipice of breaking out. And now COVID has actually provided an opportunity where those companies that 120 days ago were nice to have for strategic partners are now must have for many strategic partners. So it's been quite an exciting time. It's been a little odd while 40 million Americans or some odd are out of work. In my line of work, we're working twice as many hours as we were working before, because the solutions that our companies are developing are twice as much as in need. So it's been quite a ride, to be completely honest.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. It's got to be interesting to see so many different companies all at the same time. Faisal, with Sleep Number, gotta imagine sleep habits are changing that you're seeing as well too. Take us through a little bit how COVID has affected your guys' businesses.
Definitely, thank you. Yeah, I think so. As Bobby was mentioning, so the first impact we saw was on our supply chain, right? Most of our big chunk of our supply chain is coming from China. So when it started triggering out, we started seeing the signs in early part of the year and started planning a strategy work around it. But I think what happened was that in a company of our size, digital transformation, which takes years, we had to do it in a matter of months, right? So first thing was obviously e-commerce picked up, and at the same time, the supply chain redundancies, we had to bring it into it. And within a matter of few hours, we have to go at remote, right? So the Sleep Number, the head office is in Minneapolis, and all their innovation team is in San Jose. And Santa Clara County went sheltered in place on Friday at with a few hours of notice. So, and we had from a software side of it, we have 2 major releases that we have been working for so long, and which are the core of our offering this year. One was in April, and one is coming in a few months. And we went shelter in place right at that, and we even started working. So we had to obviously adapt to this new norm without missing a beat, as Bobby was also mentioning. So there was these, you can say, organizational behaviors that we saw. Then at the same time, what happens is, on the flip side, people are becoming more interested in their well-being, right? So as this can be an eye-opener to, that we saw a very big interest in the features that we released that related to well-being, wellness, monitoring, proactive monitoring. And what happens was that our engagement from consumers and our interest went up. I will say at least 300-400%. So that I think that's something that I feel that post-COVID also the world has changed, and as Daniel was mentioning, health and wellness is no longer an expense; it's an investment. And that's how people will treat it. So I think that's how we saw it, and I think we also saw a behavior change in our consumers. So, like for example, we see. So we have data. So I'll give you some idea of the magnitude of data that we have. So we have millions of sleeper. Sleep Number conducts the largest sleep study in the world. So every night you're talking about millions of sleepers that sleep on our platform. And from that, you get a very high level of macro level behavioral indicators that you can figure out. So we saw that people are sleeping much more restful. They're sleeping longer. So anywhere from 6 to 15 minutes every day on average. And you might think it's a small number, but typically when you talk to a sleep therapist, or you could count over a period of year, it's a lot of restful sleep that you're getting. And I think it's like a behavioral change also that we saw in terms of at a macro level on people. But I think the common thread, I think, which I'll touch upon is that digital health. I was reading a very nice talk by Eric Topol, and he said that the future of healthcare is individualized, is streaming, is self-generated data and self-owned data. So this was supposed to take years, and I think what COVID did was that this kind of thing is becoming on a fast track. And whether it's telemedicine, which went up, I was reading somewhere like from 11 to 46% this year so far, or whether it's a proactive monitoring that people are becoming more cautious about how they are feeling. So I think it's a paradigm shift, and it will carry over post-COVID also. So, and I think and from my investor hat perspective, so the startups that are capitalizing on this, or they were like well-established, like Daniel was saying, they will really benefit from this acceleration.
Thanks, Faisal. Thanks to the three of you for really setting the stage there. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we welcome you to put questions in the chat. We will start taking them shortly, so feel free. But to continue on kind of the conversation that the three of you mentioned around the kind of the acceleration of technology adoption, as well as your technology timelines. You know, you don't really live in a bubble. What about everything around you, right? So you say you're for a consumer-facing product, you know, people want more data, right? They want more features to know about their well-being. But what about FDA and other regulations and things around you? Did those things speed up in time too? And do you picture that like, is that a part-time or a short-term thing, or is that a permanent acceleration of all the technology development? Maybe start with Faisal, with you.
So right now, currently a Sleep Number, we play beneath FDA. So we are not at the point that we had to get FDA certification for our offerings. But from an investor perspective, I've seen, I think, and Daniel will confirm that the companies that are, Vessel is an example that Daniel was giving, that the rules and have become more acceptable, I think, and that's helping these kind of companies to innovate faster. Whether this is a temporary door that has been opened or it will be a sustained change in FDA policies, I think that's something yet to be seen. But I think that's one of the reasons that so much innovation suddenly around COVID has accelerated, and this has played a part. So I think I feel that that's helping right now. Whether it will continue, I think that's something maybe Daniel will have a better perspective.
Yeah, Dan, I'd be curious to know, especially, you know, is it only COVID-related technologies that you feel the regulations have opened this whole window for innovation, or are you seeing it across the board for every kind of company that you're working with?
Yeah, there's a number of ways to look at it, right? It's not just FDA policy, but it's also CMS CMS policy towards how they're reimbursing. And I see Bobby shaking his head as well. So one of the things that's happened that's led to an explosion of telehealth visits is that telehealth is now being reimbursed on par with in-person visits. So there's been this bubbling, not just of the telehealth firms that everyone's heard about, but a number of other infrastructure players in this space who have been smaller in the startup realm, and they've been growing. But the fact now that it's reimbursed on par, and we've seen this explosion of visits. I know that I've read reports from some health systems where they were doing literally tens of telehealth visits, and now they're doing tens of thousands of telehealth visits. Now that we've gotten used to it, and COVID is not going anywhere for the foreseeable future. I mean, we're most likely 12 months before anyone on this call at a minimum is going to get a prick in the shoulder for a vaccine. So people are going to get used to this. It's going to become the new normal. And I think then what that's going to allow, like where we like to invest, is the true virtualization of care. So telehealth at one level is simply a Zoom call with a medical professional on one side of it. But when you start doing very interesting things about combining telehealth with Faisal's, Sleep Number technology and that data stream, and the data streams coming from ResMed and Bobby's company from their propeller technologies or other streaming technologies, and you combine that with the Vessel into one platform, now you have the true virtualization of clinical grade care that can occur in the home. And I think that's what's going to occur because of CMS reimbursement policy changes there, for instance. On the FDA side, we've certainly seen the realization with COVID of some the wins that have been at the back of the pharma sector. So there have been a movement over the last several years to focus on rare disease and diseases with high unmet medical need, and to do so by lowering the bar to a certain extent of what drugs can get through at what speed, so that the FDA was viewing their role as saying, we want to make sure that these drugs are safe. And if a drug is safe and we can show that there's some subpopulation in a clinical trial that is responding to this, in these rare and high unmet medical diseases, then we're going to get that drug to market, and then it becomes the market's responsibility to figure out how much it should be priced at, and clinicians' responsibility to be able to parse out who that subgroup of responders are. Now, this ties into what, say, is occurring at Repurpose AI. That's a company that starts with drugs that are already known to be safe and is looking to bring them to market for COVID-19 and other indications. So now that pathway that was started a few years ago can now be accessed by companies like Repurpose or other ones like Recursion or Helix or Incitro or Silico, the name goes on. But they can access that to, in a faster fashion, bring drugs to market. So it's not just that you can discover drugs faster, but that you can bring them to market faster. And before, those companies were oftentimes getting caught up that they would do step A very quickly, but step B would still be held back due to regulatory issues. But now that's opening up, right? And so the government isn't giving up their place to make sure that the drug supply is safe. They're still very serious about that. But nonetheless, there's now a window to get things to market faster that are safe. So I'd say it's happening on both sides, both on care delivery through policy, and then also through the FDA, through changes about what the role of the FDA is and what the role of the FDA is not.
Thanks for that, Bobby. Do you want to touch on that a little bit too? It sounds like I saw you shaking your head as well. Related to that, you want to talk, so beyond regulation as well, kind of what's the future of at-home care, at-home medical data collection going forward from here as well that you've seen because of this?
Yeah, to totally agree with Daniel. The reason I was really nodding my head there is the change in behavior is based on the incentives in the system, right? And the incentives are very much on where's the money. So reimbursement and changes in reimbursement policy drives behavior changes and adoption. So what we saw at COVID and right at the beginning of this is CMS, so Medicare, they actually started to reimburse for televisits, right? And some health systems saw their adoption of telehealth, telemedicine go from 2% to 60%. Now, I don't think it's going to stay at 60%, but it won't go back to 2%. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a level at which there's going to be a permanent lift. And some things, and I read a McKinsey report, about $250 billion worth of revenue overall in the outpatient, home health and home medicine related will become virtual, will be virtualized. Will move over from the physical to the virtual world, to the digital world. Reimbursement changes are driving that primarily. Now, FDA has also helped in terms of fast tracking some of the regulatory approvals. So think about digital therapeutics, right? That have been waiting in the wings. A lot of these things are not new. It's just this COVID was the perfect opportunity, and I call it a digital coup d'etat that happened due to COVID, right? It changed the game overnight. Digital just took over. There was no other option. That was pretty much the only option to have business continuity for continuity of care for patients. So we see a radical shift that's happening along digital. So I'll come to what we see will in the future, I think, be a trend or be a permanent aspect of delivery of care, which is we have these devices which are connected, and we have 12 million of those through our sleep apnea devices or ventilators around the world. They're connecting daily, sending information to the cloud daily around the world. And so if you think about the remote patient monitoring data, connect that to the telemedicine applications, connect those to the EHR system. Yep. Now you have an interoperable healthcare ecosystem. I see that's where we are headed, right? We've played in silos before. We cannot do that anymore. And you've seen those articles before about Epic and Cerner, they're talking about interoperability, having patients' information being available in a consumable format. Some want to do it, some don't want to do it. I think those days are over.
Yep.
You have to have systems interoperate in healthcare, right? And these are pieces of the puzzle, which then form the whole ecosystem, right? So that's the whole digital ecosystem I see us going towards, and we're there.
Yep. Yeah, if I can add to that something very timely from our portfolio, for instance, one of our portfolio companies, Applied VR, just released the results of a 21-day at-home study where using their VR digital therapeutic technology with patients that were at home. So essentially they were self-administering the clinical trial. Using VR, they saw a 30% reduction in pain intensity and almost a 40% reduction in pain-related activity interference, for instance. And so when you can combine digitally, to what Bobby's saying, these active digital therapeutics with these always-on monitoring technologies that are able to evaluate if the therapeutics and the interventions are working, streamed to the cloud, attached to telehealth, and reimbursed at these new levels, that is literally the future of healthcare, and it's quite exciting, to be completely honest.
Both of you. Faisal, you want to jump in there, or you?
Yeah, just wanted to add. I think so. I completely agree with my esteemed colleagues. I think so. The one topic that I'm very passionate about is proactive monitoring, or you can say edge healthcare. So from the concept of cloud, you have cloud, and then they started pushing, and the concept of edge computing comes up, that intelligence at the edges. And what we are doing is we're pushing this toward the edge. So I can easily see a day that you're sleeping on a bed, and it's monitoring your vitals seamlessly, and for your heart health and other indicators. Your toilet, for example, I think it has sensors built in, and all the data that is going to the cloud. There are AI algorithms constantly running, monitoring it. If they see that there are some kind of markers that need to be done, then they seamlessly either integrate with your with your medical provider, and they can, with the click of a button, they can get all this important data, and that can do a proactive diagnosis. In some cases, you can find problems sooner than by the time symptoms start showing up. Another interesting point I wanted to highlight is that in the context of COVID is that we are very close working on to using your basic markers, like whether it's your resting heart rate or your respiration, heart rate variability, to detect COVID symptoms, so proactively, that you can, from those indicators, you can. So that to me is a big door opener. What I call is like proactive diagnosis, that you can, you're not doing anything specific, and you're just lying or you're sitting in your home. I'm assuming that you have smart devices all at the right locations, and all this data can proactively identify or help you live a better and healthier life. But I agree with what Bobby and Daniel saying, that it has to integrate end to end. It cannot be a point solutions. It has to take it all the way along with telemedicine. And so I think that whole ecosystem has to come. And Epic and Cerner, I think, opening up and interoperating within themselves, and also with third-party open APIs will be a big thing for that. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Faisal. I wondered if you mentioned how you saw some interesting data around people sleeping more. Curious, between the three of you, any other interesting trends you're seeing that things have changed for how we're living our lives over the last few months?
I think, Faisal, you mentioned you have millions of records of sleep data, and with our 12 million patients who are calling in every day, we have about 6 billion nights of sleep data available throughout the world. We haven't published any studies yet, so I can't share anything yet. But I'm sure we'll see indications of how people have lived through this crisis, and before and then post-crisis, or as we move through this pandemic in different parts of the world. We do know that there is significant interest in respiratory care in general. So with COVID, we do see that people, for example, you mentioned Propeller, right? People are more interested and are more adherent to their therapy. So whereas, we know that there was, let's say, a certain level of average adherence on usage of the therapy, that has improved, in a material way since COVID hit. So I think people are just more conscious about their health. They're conscious about their respiratory health in general, and in our case, respiratory care and sleep is kind of connected. So we do see more interest there. What we see also is a huge amount of a huge spike in usage of these telemonitoring facilities by clinicians. In Europe, as I mentioned, after we connected our ventilators, we had hospital systems who within days, I think within 2 or 3 days of our releasing the software, had already started adopting practices, which is extremely rare. And in Europe, which is highly regulated, they take a long time usually to get change process. I couldn't believe we had quite a few hospital systems who adopted remote patient monitoring on ventilators in a matter of days. So just the speed at which systems have started to operate is quite impressive.
So I'm gonna ask the one last question here. So make sure if you have questions as well, please enter them in the chat. We've started to see a few. Bobby, you mentioned the ecosystem of devices where we should be able to see data, not be so siloed. But we'd be remiss with TechCon SoCal talking about the ecosystem of Southern California, where there's just so many device companies, healthcare, digital health companies. What does that mean? What is Southern California's kind of impact? You think San Diego, and Orange County and LA, what is the impact in terms of just the number of companies all building these devices that are going to be connected together mean?
It's good to see that there are many companies and are sort of all concentrated in the Southern California region. I think Medtronic, ourselves, ResMed, we are moving along in that direction to ensure that we do provide better patient outcomes through connected devices. So ultimately, this all of the value we get from connecting these devices. Well, first of all, there is efficiency in the system when you do that. But beyond that, it's helping to improve patient outcome and patient experience. So Southern California, I guess, is leading the way in those terms, and the impact is global. As you know, with our install base, it is very large and very, very dispersed around the world. So I'm proud to be part of it. So I can say.
We're glad to have you here too with your leadership. Thanks, Bobby. Daniel, I'm curious from your perspective as well. I mean, you see so many companies that you do and don't invest in. What does the slice of Southern California look like compared to elsewhere where you have see technology being built?
Yeah, so we do invest nationally, but with my San Diego hat on, honestly, I'm very excited at a personal level and a professional level to get to be a part of this city in this region as we're going through a transformation that I could see planning San Diego as the leader in this connected health space. I think sometimes we forget that we have this biopharma basis with a number of gigantic multi-billion-dollar successes and exits along the way. But all you have to do is look at the two panelists. I don't know if the left or my right on your screen, but who are here along with the team at Dexcom, and then along with some of the companies that we've invested in locally, whether that be Repurpose, Trials AI, companies like Vessel, and a number of others that I could just go on and on about. And what makes it really, truly interesting is here in the San Diego region, we have this confluence, we have this history and legacy, successful legacy in biopharma. We have a university, a great university system, in particular UCSD, who's turning out very talented developers at all types of developers, true developers with expertise in deep learning, machine learning, true AI, right, that are coming out of that program, the investments in the supercomputer program that's occurring there. So you have that technology. Then you have these device companies that are here with the ResMeds and the Dexcoms and Sleep Number. And those companies, and Illumina as well, right? And all of those companies, if you talk to the folks here and the senior management at the other places, they're all rapidly going from being device companies to being connected health companies overnight. So we have this biopharma history. We've got this rich group of youngish companies that are market leaders in their space in the form of ResMed, Dexcom, and Sleep Number, combined with quite a bit of talent that's coming out of our universities, including UCSD. And you've got a growing base of funders that are now here in San Diego. And so I could see that over the next 10 years, that this market in particular becomes an epicenter, if not the epicenter, of the connected health movement, because we have all of these pieces in place that are required to cement the region as a leader in this new and growing space. And that's really exciting. And honestly, I know we aren't here to give stock advice, and I'm no financial analyst and consult with them. But I just I would reference you to look how the stocks of my fellow panelists have responded here, plus the Dexcoms of the world, and you'll see that these are market leaders now in terms of how they've led us out of the recovery. And so the public markets see this as well as the private markets, together with having all these pieces to make the cake, so to speak.
Ooh, that's not a rally cry to be one for locally. I don't know what it is. Do you want to mark on that too?
Yeah, so I think this is a topic that's very dear to my heart. So I think I'm very bullish about Southern California or overall technology ecosystem. And as part of TCA, we really see early stage startups, and the flow has been really amazing in the last 2 years, and the money started flowing in. So one of the, at least if you're looking at the early stage companies, you have to have talent. Obviously, UCSD is providing really smart individuals, and you need entrepreneurial skills, and you need money. So I think we have started seeing good angel investing here, and as also venture funds investing in San Diego. And I think I send out those emails, and $30-40 million being raised in San Diego in technology. As far as digital health, I think we have been a leader in biotech, and I think even I think 60 or 70% of the investment that we did as part of the angel group that I'm part of, I think is in that space. So one interesting thing I think is Southern California region per se. I think it's just that we kind of underestimate our so I do remember like 7-8 years back, I was very into self-driving cars and drones, and I was funding a startup. And I used to go to these big conferences, and the most attractive companies in that space were from San Diego. So I used to say I spent all the money to fly there and meet a company that's in downtown San Diego. So I think we have to connect this, like the interconnectivity. I think we need to more, and you're doing a great job in that respect. But I think we have enough talent here, and I think the future is bright.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate that. We do have time for a few questions. Like I also mentioned, the panelists have offered up to stay kind of like after a conference. And everyone rushes up to them. They've offered to go to a breakout room, and if you'd like to talk to one person specifically, we're happy to put you in a room with them. So I will put up which rooms they're going to be in shortly. But in the meantime, we've got a few questions, and if you have more, feel free to drop them in the chat. We have one from Nir. And Nir, if I don't ask it appropriately, feel free to take yourself off mute and kind of ask it yourself. But he says that system interoperate suggests the human factor must be open to collaboration to realize the progress. What are your thoughts? Would someone like to tackle that?
Nir, I think what you're saying is that you need humans to participate, right? It's not just enough to have the technology. And I think when it comes to things like personalized health records, there is a graveyard of venture-funded personal health records company funded by some of the brightest folks in venture capital, led by some of the brightest technologists. So they developed technology that worked, they got funding, and then it didn't go anywhere. And I think at least if that's part of your question, I think you're absolutely right, because people have to be active and actively want to manage their healthcare for many of those systems to work, or there has to be someone with a profit motivation that is funding the whole endeavor. And those technologies have lacked one or both of those things at various moments. But I think to maybe Bobby, what you were talking about, I think we're getting closer there, because I can speak to our portfolio's interactions with strategic companies. Things that they were kicking the tires on, strategic leaders are now saying, we have to do this, and we have to do these things yesterday. Also, many just citizens, many people who just said, my health is good enough, and weren't really paying attention. I think there's been a little bit of an awakening there. Will it stay at this level for both of those groups? Again, probably not. But have we reached a tipping point so that those programs now have the foundation that they need to be successful? I think there's a good possibility there. And I know in the interoperability space, you guys might be familiar with the local company Seekster that works in that space, that's here with a very talented team that's worked in healthcare for a number of years. And so I think we could be approaching that time right now. But you're absolutely right, it hasn't existed to date, but maybe this is the catalyst.
Thanks for that, Daniel. Anyone else want to jump in, or we can go to a next question? Okay, so Caitlin Root asks, as a recruiter, I spend time mentoring high school and college students in San Diego about new and exciting career tracks. Outside of artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, CVAR, what other areas can they study to get hired in the connected healthcare space?
I can take that. Well, AI machine learning is the hottest buzzword, but really software engineering and this foundational technology awareness and education is always the base. Even in AI machine learning, you need a lot of software engineers to actually bring any kind of model to fruition and to operationalize any of it. So I'd say the foundational software engineering capabilities are always in demand. Data analytics or anything to do with data is definitely the hottest area. So machine learning, AI techniques, those are all great as well. I'd say information security. So having specialization around info security, privacy related aspects are also becoming more and more central to every digital offering. So I'd say understanding those areas and having specialization in those skills are just as useful and important.
I completely agree with Bobby. I just want to add a few more, like simple as like cloud engineering, DevOps. Those are also, when you say connected health, it's like end-to-end, right? So like embedded all the way to cloud, to big data, to machine learning. So all those aspects come in, and generic software engineering plus these niche skills, I think, are all in demand.
Yep. And I'll even add one more to that, right? You might not be somebody who writes code or a technologist. You can still be a part of this, because with this revolution in healthcare, there's going to be whole new regulatory systems that are put into play. And so it's very likely that over the next few years, somebody that has worked in biopharma, in FDA regulatory policy, or in connected device their entire lives, much of their knowledge base might not be relevant in 5 years from now. And so there's going to be a vacuum of folks, say, in the regulatory and policy space, that are going to be necessary to launch these businesses. Because one thing we always talk about on the investment side is that we're careful to say, that you can't just take a technologist who may be a great developer, may understand deep learning, and just drop them into a healthcare scenario and think they'll be able to create a solution, because the US healthcare market is arguably the most regulated market in the world. And many, many solutions have been developed that don't work within the framework of that regulatory system. And also it takes people who understand the revenue models of this system, right? One of the reasons, to Nir's point, that interoperability has failed is because the technologists who've developed platforms that work, they've been searching for revenue models to support that technology. So there's quite a need for business expertise in the creation and the execution of revenue models, as well as in the regulatory space as well. So just because you don't write code doesn't mean you can't be a part of this future.
Great point, Daniel. Thank you. We got a question from Eugene Narciso. So Faisal and/or Bobby, is there any specific data privacy policies you wish to be implemented ASAP?
So I'll go first. You know, we are regulated across the market. So whether it's in Europe, it would be GDPR. In California, we have CCPA. Yeah. So there are all those these that just actually CCPA went into service, I think, 1st January this year.
Yes.
So you know, for our devices, our software, we are regulated through these, and we obviously follow those. I think in general, I see a worldwide trend towards privacy policies that give power to the consumer. So patient consent, and you know, having a very detailed patient consent around what are the use cases for when you say yes. Look for, you know, is it generic, or there are more specified use cases on how your data is going to be used. So I think it's very important that there is transparency provided for patients as they agree to provide their data for any of these applications. I do think at that edge, the transparency that is provided is really important. So if there's one thing I would pick that as perhaps the most important area to focus on.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Umesh. I'm going to try to summarize it a little bit around kind of as more digitization of health and connected health increases. This is around affordability. So do you think it'll become costlier and difficult for people to afford around the world? So how does money and health go hand in hand and affordability?
Mm-hmm. I'm happy to take a quick swing here. I think fundamentally, and we were talking about this on the prep call, that right now the way that healthcare is distributed, both in the U.S. And for much of the globe, is that there's a small group of folks that honestly receive way too much healthcare. Some of those folks in the U.S. are actually people who are not part of the insurance market. And so they're forced to use the emergency departments in that network when they could be given even better healthcare. And I say that my wife's an ER physician, but it could be given better healthcare if they receive more constant version of it. And many people at the top, you know, in the quote unquote 1%, they're also receiving unnecessary healthcare. So there's a small group that receives too much, but the majority of the population receives too little. The promise of the digitization of healthcare and the virtualization of healthcare is that everyone receives the healthcare that they need, right? And if you have technology that's always on, that's monitoring trends, if you're not, bursting through thresholds, you don't need to call anybody. You're fine, right? And so you minimize the wasteful use of healthcare. On the other side, folks that never see a doctor, if they've got that always on healthcare, that's a part of just their everyday life. When they cross that threshold, they can get healthcare earlier in their acute or chronic development processes to make sure acute episodes don't turn into chronic episodes, or that acute episodes are taken care of in the most economical and in the way that's best for the patient simultaneously. So I think what we see is that we get a healthier population at a lower cost due to the digitization, while at the same time, everyone receives more healthcare overall, right? So it's an odd play where you raise the amount of total healthcare being provided while at the same time lowering the cost. But I truly believe that's the future.
Thanks for that, Daniel. One thing I miss about in-person is at the end of a talk being able to give an applause. So I wish we could give everyone applause here. We'll give you everyone here a virtual digital applause. Thank you, panelists. It was phenomenal to have. I see people applauding on their videos. I love it. So one thing that the panelists have done, which is very gracious of them, is offer themselves for a little bit of follow-up. So we're going to create 3 breakout rooms. If you specifically want to talk to one of them, put just a number, just put it in the chat, and I will move you into that room. So feel free to do that now. We're only going to do it for 30 minutes or less. We'll shut it off at 30 minutes, the max. Don't feel like you have to stay, but if there's anything specifically you want to stay and ask one of the panelists, appreciate that. Thank you again for joining. And thank you, Faisal, for giving us the TechCon SoCal platform to have these kinds of conversations. We hope to have more of these. And if you are leaving now, be well, be safe, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Neil, for moderating.
Yeah, Neil, great moderation. Thank you again.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah.
Faisal, thank you for the invite.
Yep.
Thank you, Bobby.